Okay, welcome to everybody that's here in council chambers as well as those joining us from home. This is a meeting of the Poquoson City Council for Monday, September the 23rd. And tonight we're here to discuss an item that's actually on our follow-up agenda, and that is a planned unit development ordinance, or what you'll see is referred to as a PUD makeup ordinance, proposed overlay district. And this is for the Big Woods. And talking tonight for planning is going to be Debbie.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Debbie Vest, our planning director. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of City Council, I am pleased to present to you this evening the Planning Commission's recommendation on the development of a new ordinance, which is called a Planned Unit Development Mixed Use Overlay District Ordinance, which has been specifically designed for the Big Woods. The Planning Commission has been working on developing this regulation for the past 6 months. They've met consecutively and each month, and they have finalized their review and their effort by presenting the proposal to you this evening. They have recommended it as a 7-0 vote. As I mentioned, this overlay district has been specifically designed for the Big Woods, which is approximately 200 and some acres of woodland that is located along Victory Boulevard at the city's western gateway. It is located, or the land is undeveloped presently, and stretches on both the north and the south sides of Victory Boulevard. The properties within this area are individually zoned, and they're divided into approximately 69 individual parcels. There are issues with trying to develop the property. Please keep in mind that it is undeveloped woodland without an actual transportation network installed, nor is there public utilities. Also, there are vast areas of wetlands, so that's an issue that is plaguing some of the landowners and their ability to actually sell the property for development purposes. Presently, the property, or the Big Woods, is divided into 3 zoning categories. They are identified as village commercial, general commercial, and research and development. These 3 zoning categories were actually adopted by City Council in the mid-90s and served as an extension of the business corridor along with Creek Road. It was intended to have a much more upscale development design criteria to include architectural standards, which was not applicable for the With Creek Road corridor at the time. The primary objective of the new ordinance is to create a new design criteria or either an alternate design criteria for land in the Big Woods. The previous map that showed the 3 zoning classifications would remain in place. There is no plan to change the underlying zoning categories. This new ordinance would serve as an overlay district, and in order to activate this ordinance, you would have to file a petition with the City Council that would be reviewed by the Planning Commission. Public hearings are required before both bodies in order to activate the use of this ordinance. So basically, it's a rezoning application process that you're very familiar with already and is already included in our zoning ordinance. The primary objective of this provision, as I mentioned before, is to promote effective use of land, to allow for quality development, to create a mixture of both residential and commercial at a well thought out balanced mix. It's also to enable the individual landowners, as I mentioned before. There are over 60 some individually owned parcels in the Big Woods, and some of them are fairly small in nature and are deeply bedded into areas without direct access. It would provide those landowners an opportunity to create or to assemble their property with other larger pieces, which would help hopefully create a more unified development theme for the area. If at any time anybody has questions, please stop me. In order to actually implement this new regulation, it requires 3 public hearings before the City Council. Those public hearings have been scheduled for your regular session this evening, and they were also conducted by the Planning Commission at last week's Monday night meeting. We only had a couple of speakers. Both speakers were in favor of the individual public hearings. First of all, in order to implement this new change, you must change or amend the existing land use map that's in the city's comprehensive plan. That map basically identifies the various zoning categories that we have in the city, and it designates certain lands for different type of categories. If you are going to approve the use of an overlay district, then you would need to amend that map to reflect the new overlay district category on the map itself that can be activated if a rezoning application is presented to you later in with a formal application process. The other 2 changes that's necessary this evening, and public hearings are required, actually are ordinance changes. The first being the actual new overlay district regulation needs to be added to the zoning ordinance. We have placed a title of 8.4 on that new regulation. And in addition to that, there is an amendment that is needed to an existing zoning ordinance provision entitled 8.2. The 8.2 is presently in place. It was adopted in 2009 by City Council as a part of an overlay district mixed-use concept that was created for the city's waterfront areas. In amending Article 8.2, please keep in mind that this article outlines the exact legislative and administrative process in order to use the overlay district. As mentioned before, public hearings are required before both the Planning Commission and City Council. The developer of an application must provide to us a master plan with community impact assessments, which would identify any type of community needs that needs to be created in order to accommodate the residential components of this new district. In addition to that, there's an outline in the provisions detailing the type of maps that are required. Basically, the developer at the time of the rezoning application would have to identify the areas of residentials as well as the areas containing commercial, give descriptions of all of the development theme, and show basic layout of utilities and roadways, and of course of environmental areas. The new article, 8.4, is the nuts and the bolts of this new regulation. And it's divided into 2 different categories. You have those categories which identify areas or uses that are permitted in the residential areas, and then you have a category that identifies the uses that are permitted in the commercial. First, we have the residential that's broken into by right, and then those uses that require a conditional use permit. The uses that are listed in both of those categories align very closely with the uses that we already require in our residential zones. Basically, with this particular concept, though, with the overlay district, this concept is to introduce a variety of housing types in one development proposal. So you could have single family mixed with townhomes along with condominium structures. In addition to that, we are promoting recreational activities and any type of non-regional utilities, and supporting facilities would also be required or would be allowed in this district. The uses that we identified as maybe requiring a conditional use permit, if they're placed in the residential zones, are assisted living, daycare facilities, and public schools. And then, of course, any type of regional utility system with supporting facilities would also require a conditional use permit.
Debbie?
Yes.
Before you leave that chart, would private schools not be allowed there?
Private schools would require a conditional use permit.
Okay, it said public school, so I didn't know if,
Yeah, it was probably a little bit too specific, but yeah. Any type of a school facility would require a conditional use permit, and they presently do in the residential areas of the city.
Can I ask why, what the thought process was behind the assisted living type of facilities requiring a conditional use permit? What's the thinking there?
Because those type of facilities generate higher traffic volumes than a residential area typically does. So if you're going to have those type of higher traffic generators in a residential area, it gives the city an opportunity to take a look at the layout of the use to make sure that it's not going to be impactful to the neighborhood.
Wouldn't you get that same thing by the normal review?
That's an interesting point, and I'm getting ready to discuss that.
It's two different processes is what I'm saying. I'm just trying
Well,
to...
actually, it's not. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it now.
Go ahead.
It's probably wise to do that. Okay, we talked about the master plan application process. So if somebody wants to activate the use of the overlay district, they have to come in with a rezoning application. If the rezoning application identifies uses that are listed in the ordinance as requiring a conditional use permit, then the conditional use permit process is not necessarily separated from the master plan process. It's all included as one. The only real reason why there's a listing for conditional use permits is, let's say, 15 years down the road, you have a developer or an individual that wants to come in and build an assisted living institution in a residential area. The conditional use permit process is there to safeguard and to require that special provision so that we can kind of monitor exactly that use and trying to make it blend in with the residential character. So the conditional use permit is not necessarily a separate process if the proposed use is identified at the time that the master plan is approved. Does that make sense?
I think so. So what you're saying is if you come in with a plan, and we don't have a plan in front of us tonight, so I'll just use this as an example. If somebody came in and wanted to build a facility or living quarters that then led to a convalescent care situation, if they came in with their initial proposal saying all that, basically the conditional use permit rides along with it.
Correct.
And therefore it's not a separate process, it's all the same.
Yes, sir.
If the neighborhood was developed independently, and what you're saying is then somebody that came in and wanted to run a convalescent care facility came in and said, I would like to put this here because of the success of this neighborhood, then it would just be the conditional use permit portion of that.
Correct.
Okay. I think
it's a safeguard, basically.
Okay.
Okay. All right, any other questions on the residential? All right, commercial is the same as I mentioned with the residential. The uses that are allowed by right very closely align with the uses that we presently allow along the B2 Wood Creek Road business corridor. Basically, your professional office, personal services, and retail uses are permitted by right in the district. Now, there are some uniqueness with the retail uses that I'm going to cover in the next slide. Uses that are high traffic generators and or could create loud noise, intrusive smells or whatever, such as convenience stores with fueling facilities, those type of uses require a conditional use permit if they're placed in this district. And that's the same provision that we presently have in our ordinances. So it's really, there is no difference.
Debbie, is high traffic defined?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And it's the functioning of...
As long as you have a definition, okay.
And it's the functioning is the key component there, you know, whether or not, what kind of, with the high traffic, cause detrimental impacts to our existing roadway system? And how are they going to enter and exit? And you don't want these type of activities adjacent to residential areas if you can prevent it. Now, there are some uniqueness with the commercial areas that I definitely want to point out. Orientation, especially high traffic generators, they're encouraged to be oriented along City Hall Avenue and or Victory Boulevard or any type of public street. The thought process is that they need high visibility in order to continue, to make them a sustainable component in the community. Secondly, large-scale retail was discussed, and there was concern that if you did not try to control larger-scale retail uses, that you may end up with several larger box type of facilities that may not be supportive for the residential component in this overlay district, and or it could possibly compete with our existing B2 business corridor. So the Planning Commission is recommending that you require any type of retail activity that's going to include retail floor area measuring more than 15,000 square feet require a conditional use permit for those uses. Now, the 15,000 square feet includes the area for both inside and exterior retail floor area, which brings up another point. On the exterior storage area, they're recommending that you maintain a 50% footprint of any type of exterior display and or storage area that's subordinate to the retail use. That's to avoid a larger exterior retail area than an interior retail area. So those are some uniqueness for the commercial areas that was specifically a concern of the Planning Commission.
Debbie, before you get away from those comments.
Yes, sir.
In the beginning, I thought you said that this planned development overlay would not change the zoning characteristics of the 3 zones that's included within it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so if you had the section that's zoned commercial business and somebody wanted to come in with a warehouse type area there, would they then need a special use permit or conditional use permit to put that business in the business district?
If the proposal is not a part of the master plan, and if it's a use that would require a conditional use permit under the underlying zoning district regulations, then yes, sir, they would need a conditional use permit. However, if it's a use that's permitted by right in the underlying district, then it's not, a conditional use permit would not be required. However, they would still have the option of developing their property independent of this master plan process. And under the design criteria, though, for the underlying district.
Are they today at that zoning district required to have a conditional use permit?
Warehouses?
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of warehouse. Remember that we recently modified our ordinances, and Kevin, help me out. Did that include the 3 zoning categories in the Big Woods? I think it did, didn't it?
Which one?
The storage yard?
Storage yard, yes, that did affect all 3 of them.
Well, I wasn't considering a storage yard. I was talking about like a large warehouse, a Costco type facility.
Okay.
A Costco facility being a big box retailer would.
Yeah, a big box retail in the business district today, would they require
Yes,
a
sir.
conditional use permit?
Yes, sir. In the GC and the B2, they would require. And I forget what the stipulation is. Is it 25,000 square feet or?
Well, I just want to, 15,000 square feet's not very large in the business community. I mean, it's 100 by 150, right?
Right, 100 by 150.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're not being, and I understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish, but I'd like to know what that number is if we could get it before we get to the regular meeting to see if we're consistent. If our existing ordinance says this, and yet we're putting a smaller stipulation on if you do it as part of a planned unit development. I just want to stay consistent.
Okay.
But I get, because I'm thinking of, all right, let's take some of the better looking businesses in the city of Poquoson. Let's take a Rite Aid. That's probably not going to be 15, that's probably going to be right at 15,000 square feet.
12,000 square feet.
I got it. Where's my phone?
Okay. We'll just pause right here.
Yeah, good idea.
I don't have it.
Yeah, we did an ambulance right away at City Hall in Poquoson, Virginia. At City Hall, it's 1 Municipal Drive,
500 City Hall Avenue.
500 City Hall Avenue. The gentleman that's in distress. I don't have trouble reading, yes, sir.